The year was 1800, and Caleb Stone had learned that memory was a peculiar companion for an old man. Some days it arrived sharp as winter wind, bringing back every detail of a moment from decades past. Other days it drifted like smoke, leaving him grasping at shapes that dissolved between his fingers. He sat on the porch of his cabin, the same cabin he had expanded with his own two hands 16 years earlier, watching his grandson Thomas stack firewood with the careful precision of a boy trying to impress. The autumn sun painted the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in shades of copper and gold, the same colors he remembered from that October day in 1878 when everything changed. Thomas was 12 now, the same age Caleb's own son had been when scarlet fever took him in 1878. The resemblance was enough to make the old man's chest tighten, though whether from pain or gratitude, he could no longer distinguish. The boy turned, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Grandpa, why did you live up here alone for so long? Ma says you were already old when Grandma found you." Caleb allowed himself a dry smile. His daughter Sarah had inherited her mother's directness, along with her skill with healing herbs. "Your ma doesn't understand the meaning of tact, does she? She says you taught her to speak truth plainly." "I suppose I did." Caleb shifted in his chair, feeling the familiar complaint of joints that had worked too hard for too many years. "Come sit with me, boy. There's time before supper, and you're old enough now to hear how an old man learned to live again." Thomas bounded up the porch steps with the easy energy of youth and settled cross-legged at Caleb's feet, looking up with eyes full of expectation. The old man took a moment, gathering the threads of a story he had told in pieces over the years, but never in full. "It was the fall of 1878, Caleb began, his voice taking on the cadence of a practiced storyteller. "I was 56 years old, about the age your Uncle Marcus is now, and I thought I was done with living." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with old grief. "Will you refrain?" Thomas asked simply. "Because everyone I had ever loved was dead, and I believed it was my fault." Caleb closed his eyes, and the years fell away like autumn leaves. The mountain morning in October 1878 came cold and clear, the kind of dawn that made a man grateful for thick wool and a good fire. Caleb Stone stood at the edge of the clearing near his cabin, breath fogging in the sharp air, and surveyed the elk trail that wound down through the ponderosa pines toward the frozen creek below. He was not the man he had been at 30. His beard had gone more silver than black. His hands bore the permanent stiffness of old breaks that never healed quite right, and his left knee sent up a complaint with every step when the temperature dropped. But he could still read sign better than men half his age, and his eyes were clear enough to thread a needle or sight down a rifle barrel at 200 yards. The Springfield Model 1873 rifle felt familiar in his hands, its weight and balance as known to him as his own heartbeat. He had carried versions of this weapon through 2 wars and countless conflicts, and it had never failed him. Not like flesh and blood had failed him, not like he had failed those he loved. The elk trail showed fresh tracks from the night before, deep prints in the thin layer of snow that had fallen just after midnight. A bull, judging by the size. Maybe 600 pounds of meat if he was lucky, enough to see him through the winter if he could preserve it properly. He moved down the trail with practiced silence, placing each foot with care, avoiding the brittle branches and loose stones that would betray his presence. This was the language he understood now. The simple conversation between hunter and hunted. No complications, no heartbreak, just survival reduced to its most basic terms. The elk appeared an hour later, standing in a small clearing where the morning sun broke through the canopy, steam rising from its breath. A magnificent bull with a rack that would have made a younger man dream of trophy mounts in admiration. Caleb simply saw winter stores. He raised the Springfield, found his aim with the ease of decades, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley, sharp and final. The elk dropped where it stood, dead before it hit the ground. A clean kill, the only kind Caleb allowed himself anymore. He was halfway through the butchering process when he heard the crows. Not the casual conversation of birds going about their day, but the sharp, agitated calls that meant something had disturbed the natural order of things. Predator or prey, blood or fear. Either way, something worth paying attention to. Caleb straightened slowly, wiping his knife on a cloth, and listened. The crows were to the northeast, maybe a quarter mile away. Close enough to matter. He could ignore it, should ignore it. His business was here, with this elk that needed processing before the meat spoiled. But isolation had taught him that survival meant paying attention to everything the mountain tried to tell you, and the crows were insistent. He left the elk, marking the spot carefully in his mind, and followed the sound. The snow made tracking easy, fresh prints, human this time, irregular and dragging. Blood drops, bright red against white. Whoever had made these tracks was hurt badly and moving without skill or awareness. Running blind. The trail led through a dense stand of pines and emerged at a tumble of granite boulders where the mountain thrust up through its covering of trees like bone through skin. And there, collapsed against the largest boulder with blood soaking through makeshift bandages, was a woman. Caleb stopped 30 feet away, hand dropping to the revolver at his hip out of pure instinct. His mind worked through what his eyes were showing him. Apache from the style of her clothing. Young, maybe late 20s, deerskin dress decorated with beadwork that had seen better days. A medicine bag clutched in her left hand, even in unconsciousness. And a bullet wound in her right shoulder that had been roughly bandaged but was clearly infected. She was dying. That was the simple truth of it. Without treatment, she would be dead by nightfall. Maybe sooner. Caleb should have walked away. Every ounce of hard-won wisdom told him that involvement led to complications and complications led to loss. He had built his isolation deliberately, brick by brick, loss by loss. This woman was none of his concern. But then her head lolled to the side, and for just a moment, in the angle of her jaw and the set of her features, she looked like Abigail, his daughter. Dead these 6 years at 14, killed by men Caleb had not been there to stop because he had been off hunting, just like today. The resemblance was fleeting, gone as soon as it had appeared. But it was enough. Damn it, Caleb muttered to no one. He holstered the revolver and approached carefully, making noise so that if she woke, she would not be startled into doing something foolish. But she did not wake. Her breathing was shallow, her skin had the grayish cast of shock and blood loss. And when he touched her forehead, it was burning with fever. He had seen enough wounds in his time to know this one would kill her without immediate attention. The bullet had gone through the shoulder, but the exit wound was ragged, the sort that came from a poorly made round or one that had tumbled on impact. The infection had set in deep, the smell unmistakable, even in the cold air. Caleb made his decision with the same practicality he brought to everything else. He could not save the elk and the woman both. The elk would keep for a few hours in this temperature. The woman would not. He lifted her with care, noting that she weighed far less than she should. Starvation on top of injury. Not running from something, running from everything. He carried her back toward his cabin, stopping twice to rest his complaining back and once to adjust his grip when her head lolled dangerously. It was only when he was halfway home that he felt it, a flutter against his chest where her body pressed against his, a movement that was not her breathing. His eyes dropped to her abdomen, and he saw what he had missed in his first assessment, the slight swell beneath the deerskin dress. She was pregnant. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not just a dying woman carrying a child. The complexity of the situation multiplied instantly, and with it came a cascade of memories he had spent years trying to bury. Sarah, his wife, pregnant with Daniel. The joy and terror mixed together. The nights lying awake wondering if he was ready to be a father. The morning Daniel was born and Caleb had held that tiny, impossibly fragile life and sworn to protect it forever. A promise he had failed to keep. By the time he reached his cabin, his arms were shaking and his back was screaming, but he got her inside and onto his bed. It was the only bed, a simple frame with a corn husk mattress, and he laid her there with surprising gentleness. Then he set to work with the focused intensity of a man who had learned field medicine out of necessity. He built up the fire until the cabin was warm enough to strip away her bloody clothing without sending her deeper into shock. He boiled water in his largest pot and gathered what medical supplies he had. Whiskey for cleaning, needle and thread for stitching, clean cloth for bandages, willow bark tea for fever and pain. The wound was worse than he had thought. The infection had spread into the surrounding tissue, turning it angry red and swollen. He would have to clean it thoroughly, cut away the dead tissue, and hope that the rest would heal. It was brutal work, and he was grateful she remained unconscious throughout. He worked for hours as the afternoon light faded and evening came on. When he finally finished, the wound was as clean as he could make it, stitched closed with neat, even sutures, and wrapped in clean bandages. He had done everything he knew how to do. The rest was up to her body and whatever God she believed in. Caleb sat back in his chair, every joint protesting, and looked at the woman on his bed. In the firelight cleaned of blood and dirt, she looked younger than he had first thought. Her face had the kind of strength that came from enduring things that should have broken her. There were small scars on her hands and arms, the kind that came from hard work and harder living. Her hair was long and black, and someone had braided it with care before whatever violence had put a bullet in her. The medicine bag still lay clutched in her hand. Caleb carefully pried her fingers open and examined it. Inside were seeds, white seeds, each about the size of a grain of wheat. He did not recognize them, but the care with which they were stored told him they mattered. There was also a piece of paper, folded small and worn at the creases from repeated handling. Caleb unfolded it and held it to the firelight. The writing was in English, official and precise, a military notice. And what it said made Caleb's blood run cold. Wanted, seeds of white sage, Salvia apiana, and the Apache medicine woman known to carry them. Reward of $800 for seeds or capture. Medical emergency requires immediate acquisition. Contact Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan, Fort Stanton Medical Corps. Caleb read it 3 times, each word settling into his gut like a stone. Marcus Brennan. After all these years, that name still had the power to bring back memories. They had served together in the Mexican War. Young men full of certainty about right and wrong. They had fought side by side at Chapultepec. They had saved each other's lives more than once. And then came the Apache campaigns. And Caleb had learned that certainty was a luxury that died hard in the desert. He had refused orders at Camp Grant in 1871, refused to participate in the massacre of women and children. Marcus had not refused. Marcus had followed orders, and afterward, they had never spoken again. Now Marcus was hunting a pregnant woman for seeds that supposedly had medical value. The man Caleb had once called friend had become this. The revelation was bitter as alkali water. Caleb refolded the paper and tucked it back into the medicine bag, then placed the bag on the table where it would be safe. He looked at the woman again, this stranger who had brought the past crashing back into his carefully constructed solitude. "What kind of trouble have you brought to my door?" he asked the silence. She did not answer, lost somewhere in the fever dreams that gripped her. But as Caleb watched, her hand drifted to her stomach in a protective gesture so instinctive it continued even in unconsciousness. He understood that gesture. He had seen Sarah do the same thing when she carried their children. The universal language of a mother protecting her young, even when sleep or sickness took away all other awareness. Something shifted in Caleb's chest, a sensation he had not felt in so long he almost did not recognize it. Not quite compassion, not quite duty, something older and more fundamental. The simple recognition that some things were worth fighting for, even when you thought you were done fighting. He spent the night in his chair by the fire, rifle across his lap, listening to her labored breathing and watching the door. If Marcus had men searching, they would not stop because of darkness. And if they came, Caleb would have to decide whose side he was on. The decision, he realized somewhere in the small hours before dawn, had already been made. The moment he picked her up, the moment he brought her home, the moment he cleaned and stitched her wounds instead of leaving her to the mountain's mercy. He was just waiting for the consequence. Morning came with its usual indifference to human concerns. The sun rose, the birds sang, and the woman on Caleb's bed remained unconscious but alive. Her fever had broken sometime before dawn, and her breathing had settled into something more regular. Progress, but slow. Caleb was at the table working on a strip of leather that would become a new belt when he heard the change, a subtle shift in her breathing, the sound of someone returning to consciousness. He set down his work and turned slowly, making no sudden moves. Her eyes were open, dark, and impossibly alert for someone who should still be lost in fever dreams. And in her hand, retrieved from somewhere in his bedding, was a knife. Not large, but plenty large enough to kill a man if placed correctly. She sat up with visible effort, the blade steady despite the tremor in her arm, and pressed it against her own throat. Not his, her own. The message was clear. Come closer and I die. Try to take me and I die. You will not have me alive. Caleb held up both hands, showing them empty. Easy now. Nobody's taking anybody anywhere. She said nothing, but her eyes tracked him with the focus of a cornered animal deciding between fight and flight. You've been out cold for near 20 hours, Caleb continued, keeping his voice level and calm. I cleaned your wound and stitched you up. You were dying of infection. Still nothing. But the knife did not waver. My name is Caleb Stone. This is my cabin. You're in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, about 40 miles from Socorro, and right now you're safe. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was rough from disuse and fever, and her English carried the distinctive accent of someone whose first language was Apache. Why you help me? It was the same question Caleb had been asking himself. He answered with the truth, or at least part of it. Because I'm an old man who's already lost everything he cared about. If I can't help one person when I still have the chance, then my death won't mean a damn thing. She studied him for a long moment, and he saw her taking in details. His age, his scars, the rifle leaning against the wall, the simple, sparse nature of the cabin that spoke of a man living alone for a long time. You not scared of Apache? She asked. I've fought with Apache, fought against Apache, lived near Apache for 30 years. I know you're not devils, just people who've had their land stolen and their families killed. Something flickered across her face. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first small crack in her armor. Slowly, she lowered the knife, not setting it to the side, but no longer pressing it to her own throat. Caleb let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. I'm going to stand up now and get you some water. You've got to be thirsty. He moved with deliberate slowness, giving her time to react if she chose to. But she simply watched as he filled a cup from the water bucket and brought it to her, staying just beyond knife range as he set it on the small table beside the bed. She drank it in 3 long swallows, and he refilled it twice more before her thirst was satisfied. Your shoulder's going to hurt like hell for a few days, Caleb said, returning to his chair. The infection was bad, but I think I got it in time. You need to keep the bandage clean and not move that arm more than necessary. She touched the bandaging carefully, feeling the neat stitches beneath. You do good work. I've had practice, too much practice. You were soldier? A long time ago, before I learned better. She nodded slowly, and some of the tension went out of her shoulders. I am Nalin. It mean beautiful in Apache, but my mother joked when she named me. Caleb, he replied, though he had already given his name. It felt important to repeat it, to establish this as a conversation between two people, not captor and captive. Why you live alone, Caleb, who was soldier? The question was direct in the way of someone whose culture did not waste words. Caleb found himself appreciating that directness even as it scraped against old wounds. Because everyone I loved is dead, and it was safer for everyone if I stayed away from people I might come to care about. Nalin tilted her head, considering this. That is a lonely way to die. It's the way I chose. Then you fool. The bluntness startled a laugh out of him, short and sharp. You might be right about that. She smiled then, just a slight curve of her mouth, and it transformed her face from hard to something softer. Younger. My mother say, man who choose to be alone is not strong, is scared. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. The smile faded. She dead now, soldiers kill her. The simple statement carried worlds of grief. Caleb nodded. I'm sorry for your loss. You not the one who kill her. Maybe not, but I wore the same uniform as the men who did. They sat in silence for a moment, two people on opposite sides of a great divide, finding unexpected common ground in the territory of loss. Finally, Nalin spoke again. The paper in my medicine bag. You read it? I did. Then you know what they want, the seeds. White sage, worth $800 apparently. Worth more than money, worth lives. She paused, seeming to gather her strength. My mother was medicine woman. She know how to use sage to heal fever, infection, sickness of lungs. She saved many people, Apache and white both. And someone wanted to take that knowledge. They want to own it, put price on healing, make money from pain. Her voice carried a bitterness that went bone deep. When she refused to give seeds, they burn our camp. Kill her. I run with seeds to keep them safe. Caleb thought about the notice again. Medical emergency, it had said. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Brennan. The man who signed that notice. I knew him once, long time ago. Nalen's eyes sharpened. You know him? We were soldiers together. Friends, I thought. But that was before I understood what kind of man he was. He will come looking. He send men already. That why I run. That why I have bullet in shoulder. How far along are you? Caleb asked, nodding toward her stomach. She placed a hand over the slight swell, protective. 4 moons, maybe little more. Oh, yeah. And the father? Dead, killed by same soldiers who shoot me. Her voice remained steady, but Caleb saw the grief in her eyes. He was brave man, good man, die so I can run. 4 months pregnant, wounded, infected, hunted, and still fighting. Caleb felt something he had thought long dead stir in his chest. Not pity, she would not want pity, but respect. Rest now, he said. You're safe here for the time being. Nobody knows you're here except me and the crows. And when they come, we'll figure that out when it happens. She studied him for a long moment, and he met her gaze steadily. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it, because she finally nodded and let her eyes close. Caleb returned to his leatherwork, but his mind was elsewhere. He had meant what he said about helping her, but he also knew that such intentions always came with a price. And when Marcus Brennan arrived, as he inevitably would, the cost would be measured in choices Caleb had hoped never to face again. The choice between the easy path and the right one, between protecting himself and protecting someone else, between the man he had become in his isolation and the man he had been before loss taught him to fear connection. For 16 years, he had lived alone on this mountain, and it had been safe, predictable, empty in a way that could almost pass for peace if he did not look too close. Now a woman lay on his bed, carrying a child and secrets worth killing for, and safety was a memory. Caleb worked his leather and listened to her breathing and waited for the world to come knocking. 3 days passed in a strange rhythm of caution and necessity. Nalen's fever stayed down, and the infection began to retreat under Caleb's careful treatment. She was young and strong, her body fighting back with the resilience of someone accustomed to hardship. She slept for long stretches those first 2 days, her body demanding the rest it needed to heal. When she was awake, she watched Caleb with careful attention, studying him the way a person studies someone they need to trust, but are not yet sure they can. Caleb, for his part, went about his daily routine with her presence as a new variable to account for. He brought in wood. He tended the fire. He prepared simple meals of cornmeal mush and jerky and the last of his stored vegetables. He offered her food and water at regular intervals and changed her bandages twice a day with impersonal efficiency. They spoke little. Nalen was still weak, and Caleb was not a man given to filling silence with unnecessary words. But in the quiet, they learned each other in small ways. He learned that she woke at the slightest sound, but made no sound herself. That she touched her medicine bag several times a day like a talisman. That she watched the door even in her sleep, never fully letting down her guard. She learned that he moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had been broken and healed imperfectly. That he cleaned his weapons every evening as ritual. That he spoke more gently to his horse than to any human, murmuring to the old mare in tones of affection he seemed to reserve only for animals. On the 3rd morning, Nalen woke to find Caleb missing from his chair. She sat up, ignoring the pull of healing tissue, and looked around the cabin. Empty. The rifle was gone from its place by the door. Fear spiked through her, sharp and immediate. Had he gone to get soldiers? To betray her now that she was strong enough to be moved? Then she heard it, the rhythmic sound of wood being split. She moved to the window, careful of her balance, and looked out. Caleb was at the chopping block, splitting logs with the methodical efficiency of long practice. He was not young, and the work showed in the careful way he positioned each log, the measured swing of the axe, the pause between strikes to let his back rest. But he was still strong, and the pile of split wood grew steadily. Nalen watched for several minutes, reassessing. This was not a man preparing to move. This was a man preparing for winter, for staying, which meant perhaps that she was staying too, at least for now. She found herself studying the cabin with new eyes. One room, maybe 16 feet square, a stone fireplace that had been built with skill, a table and two chairs, the bed, a trunk in the corner, minimal, functional, the home of someone who had reduced life to its essentials. But there were small signs of a past life. A shelf held three books, their spines worn from reading. A tin plate on the wall showed careful decorative stamping around its edge. A woman's dress hung on a peg, faded but still whole, as if waiting for someone to claim it. The dress made her stomach tighten. Wife, probably. Where was she now? Dead, like everyone else Caleb had lost? Or run off, unable to bear his solitude? When Caleb came back inside, arms loaded with split wood, Nayland was dressed in the dress she had found. It fit well enough, though the shoulders were tight over her bandaging. She had braided her hair and washed her face in the water basin. He stopped in the doorway and something crossed his face. Grief, sharp and immediate, before his expression smoothed back to neutral. That was my wife's, he said quietly. She'd want it used. But if it bothers you, it not bother me. Nayland smoothed the fabric. She have good taste, simple but strong. That was Sarah. He set down the wood and began stacking it by the fireplace. Simple and strong. Gone 18 years now. Fever took her and my boy both. I am sorry. So am I. He finished stacking and turned to face her. You're up and moving. That's good. But don't push it too hard. Infection can come back if you tear those stitches. I not child. I know my body. Never said you were. But healing takes time, no matter how tough you are. She studied him, noting the way he kept space between them, always giving her room to retreat. A man conscious of how his size and presence might seem threatening. It was unusual in her experience. Most white men took what they wanted and never thought twice about permission. I want to help, she said. I'm not good at just sitting. You're still healing. I can do small things, organize, repair. I have hands. Caleb considered this. She could see him weighing the risks, the complications. Finally, he nodded. Tools need sorting. They're scattered all over creation, and I never remember where anything is. If you want to organize them, I wouldn't argue. It was busy work, and they both knew it. But it was also acceptance. A recognition that she was not just a patient, but a person. Someone with agency and choice. Nolan spent the afternoon sorting through Caleb's considerable collection of tools. He was clearly skilled at multiple trades. There were woodworking tools, leatherworking tools, tools for metalwork and repair, all well-maintained but haphazardly stored. She created order from chaos, grouping like with like, testing each tool to understand its purpose. Some she recognized, others were mysteries she set aside to ask about later. Caleb worked on expanding his small shelter for the horse, adding a second stall. He moved with purpose but without hurry, the pace of a man who knew his own limitations and worked within them. They did not speak much, but there was a companionability in the shared labor, each focused on their own task but aware of the other's presence. It was, Nolan realized, the first time in months she had felt something approaching safety. That evening, as they shared a simple meal of fried cornmeal and beans, Caleb finally asked the question she had been expecting. Where were you heading when they shot you? North, away from soldiers. North is a big direction. Anywhere specific? She hesitated, then decided honesty was owed. He had saved her life, fed her, given her his wife's dress. Valles Caldera, old volcano valley, very far. Ground there is good for white sage. If I plant seeds there, maybe they grow, maybe medicine not die with my mother. Caleb set down his plate, leaning back in his chair. That's 80, 90 miles. Through country that's being actively patrolled, and winter's coming. I know, but his only chance. If I not plant seeds, they die. All mother's knowledge die. All healing die. And if you die trying to get there, the seeds die anyway. Then I die trying is better than give up. He looked at her for a long moment, and she met his gaze steadily. Whatever test this was, she would not flinch from it. Finally, Caleb nodded slowly. Tell me about white sage. What makes it so valuable that men will kill for it? So she told him about how the plant grew only in certain soil, volcanic and rich, about how it took 5 years from seed to flower, but once established could live for decades. About the careful harvesting of leaves, the precise way they had to be dried, the specific applications for different ailments. About how her mother had learned from her grandmother, who learned from hers, passing down knowledge that went back generations. How Guyen had been renowned as a healer, sought out by Apache and settler alike when sickness struck. How she had never turned anyone away, never demanded payment she knew they could not afford. Rich man from Santa Fe gets sick with lung disease, Nayland continued, her voice tight with anger. Mother cure him. He grateful, offer much money. She refuse. She say healing not for buying. He leave, she think his end. But it wasn't. No, he tells soldiers about sage. They come, demand seeds, demand mother teach them. Say they make medicine for everyone, save many lives. Sound good, yes? Her eyes blazed. But they not want to give medicine, they want to sell, make profit. My mother say no. Medicine belonged to earth, to people, not for white man's money, and they killed her for it. They burn our camp, say we hide weapons, that we dangerous. They lie. We only had medicine. My mother die in fire, but before she die, she give me seeds. Tell me run. Tell me plant them where white men never find. Caleb absorbed this, his expression dark. It was a familiar story in its bones. Greed dressed up as civilization. Theft disguised as progress. He had seen it play out 100 times across the West. The man who signed that warrant, he said, Marcus Brennan. I knew him in the war. He was a good man once. Or I thought he was. Good men do bad things when they believe they right, Nolan said quietly. Maybe he think he saved lives by taking seeds. Doesn't make it right. No, but make it complicated. Caleb stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening mountains. He'll come, he said finally. Marcus doesn't give up once he's set his mind to something, and he has resources I don't. I know, that's why I need to leave soon, before I bring trouble to you. You're not leaving until that shoulder is healed enough to ride. That's at least another week, probably 2. You could give me up, collect reward, buy much supplies for winter. He turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes she had not seen before, not anger, not pity, something harder and more determined. I stopped doing what was easy instead of what was right a long time ago. Cost me everything then. I'm not making the same mistake twice. Before Nolan could respond, they heard it. The sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving at a steady pace up the mountain trail. Caleb's hand went to his rifle in one smooth motion. Get into the back corner. Don't make a sound. I can fight. Not with one arm, you can't. Now move. She recognized the tone. Command, not request. She slipped into the corner, farthest from the door, into shadows where the firelight did not reach, and watched as Caleb positioned himself by the window. 3 riders emerged from the tree as the last light faded from the sky. 2 regular cavalry soldiers and 1 officer. Even at this distance, even after 26 years, Caleb recognized him. Marcus Brennan, older, grayer, but with the same ramrod posture and air of absolute certainty. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. He let them come within 20 feet before he spoke. That's close enough. The rider stopped. Marcus dismounted with the easy grace of someone who spent half his life in the saddle and looked up at the cabin. His face was weathered but handsome still, hair gone silver at the temples, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow that Caleb did not remember. Caleb Stone, Marcus said, and his voice carried genuine surprise. I'll be damned. They said a mountain man lived up here, but I never thought it would be you. Marcus, Caleb kept his voice neutral. It's been a while. 26 years since Camp Grant. Since you followed orders, I refused. The words hung in the cold air between them, sharp as broken glass. Marcus's jaw tightened. I was a soldier. You were a soldier. We did what soldiers do. We murdered women and children. That's what we did. I just had the sense to walk away before I did something I couldn't live with. And look where it got you, living alone on a mountain, talking to yourself. Better than living with blood I can't wash off. One of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, Marcus held up a hand, keeping him still. I didn't come here to refight old battles, Caleb. I'm tracking someone. An Apache woman, wounded. She would have come through here 3, 4 days ago. Lots of Apache in these mountains. Could be anyone. This one is carrying something valuable. Seeds from a medicinal plant. White sage. She stole them from a camp we were clearing. Clearing or burning? Marcus's eyes hardened. Watch your mouth, old man. Or what? You'll shoot me? Go ahead. I'm too tired to care anymore. They stared at each other and Caleb saw the calculation happening behind Marcus's eyes. He was weighing risks, measuring options. Finally, Marcus spoke again, and this time there was something else in his voice. Not anger, but desperation. My daughter is dying. The words came off flat, robbed of emotion by sheer force of will. Emily, 16 years old, consumption. The doctors say she won't see Christmas. But there are records, old records from when the Army employed Apache scouts, that say this sage can treat lung disease, that it can cure what's killing my little girl. Caleb felt the world shift beneath him. This was not simple greed. This was a father trying to save his child. He understood that desperation. He had felt it himself sitting by Daniel's bedside, watching fever burn through his son's body, while he could do nothing but hold his hand and pray to gods that did not answer. I'm sorry about your daughter, he said, and meant it. But hunting a pregnant woman for medicine, that's not the answer. How do you know she's pregnant? The question came too quick, too sharp. Caleb recognized his mistake immediately but pushed forward. I don't. But if I did find a wounded woman, pregnant or not, I'd help her. That's what decent people do. Marcus stepped closer and his hand moved to his sidearm. She's here, isn't she? You're hiding her. Nobody's here but me and 20 years of regrets. Caleb, I don't have time for this. Emily is dying. Every day matters. If you know where this woman is, if you have those seeds, I'm asking you as an old friend to tell me. We're not friends, Marcus. Haven't been since 1871. Then I'm asking you as a father, one father to another. You lost a son. You know what it's like. Don't make me lose my daughter. And there it was, the weight of the choice landing squarely on Caleb's shoulders just as he had known it would. He could give up Naylin, trade her life for Emily's, make a devil's bargain that would save one innocent by sacrificing another. Or he could refuse and know that his refusal might kill a 16-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong except have the misfortune of being sick. There was no good answer, only bad and worst. Caleb took a slow breath, feeling the cold air burn in his lungs. Marcus, I'm going to make you an offer, and you're going to listen to the whole thing before you decide. I'm listening. Give me 3 days. If there's a woman here, if she has these seeds, I'll talk to her. I'll explain about Emily, and if she's willing to give you some of the seeds, I'll bring them to you myself. And if she's not willing, then you come back with your men and search. I won't stop you. Marcus stared at him, clearly trying to decide if this was a trap. 3 days is a long time. 3 days is what you'll give me if you want to do this without bloodshed. Otherwise, you can try to search now, and I'll put bullets in you and your men before you get within 10 feet of my door. The soldier on the left shifted, raising his rifle slightly. Caleb swung his own rifle to point directly at Marcus. First shot goes through your chest. You might want to tell your boys to stay calm. Marcus held up a hand, and the soldier lowered his weapon. The tension stretched thin enough to snap. Finally, Marcus nodded. 3 days. But Caleb, if you're playing me, if she runs in that time, I'll come back with a full company, and I'll burn this mountain to bedrock if that's what it takes. Understood. Marcus remounted, and the 3 riders turned and headed back down the trail. Caleb watched until they disappeared into the darkness, then lowered his rifle and let out a breath that felt like it came from his boots. When he turned back to the cabin, Nalan was standing in the doorway. Her face was unreadable, but her hand rested on her stomach in that protective gesture he was learning to recognize. You could have given me to him, she said quietly. Save white girl. Maybe. Why you not? Caleb looked at her, this woman who had crashed into his life like a stone through ice, and told her the truth. Because 18 years ago, I left my daughter alone in this cabin while I went hunting. When I came back, she'd been killed by men I wasn't there to stop. I've asked myself every day since then if I made the right choice, if maybe I should have stayed, If maybe her life was worth more than whatever deer I was tracking. He paused, the old grief rising like floodwater. I can't save Abigail. She's dead and buried, and nothing will change that. But I can make a different choice this time. I can choose to protect someone instead of leaving them to die. Even if it costs me everything. Even if it's the wrong choice. At least it's a choice I can live with. Nalin moved closer until they stood face to face in the firelight. The girl, Emily, she is innocent. So are you. So is your child. Then what we do? How we save both? I don't know yet, Caleb admitted, but we've got 3 days to figure it out. And maybe, just maybe, there's a solution that doesn't require anyone to die. She nodded slowly, and for the first time since he had found her, something like trust appeared in her eyes. Not complete, not certain, but present. They went back inside, and Caleb barred the door. Tomorrow they would talk about seeds and medicine and impossible choices. Tomorrow they would try to find a path that led somewhere other than tragedy. But tonight they simply sat by the fire in a silence that was no longer quite so heavy with suspicion. Two people who had seen too much death trying to figure out how to choose life. Outside, the mountain wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow. Winter was coming, and with it, the end of easy options. But for now, in this moment, they had shelter and warmth and the fragile beginning of something that might, given time, become trust. And for an old man who had given up on trust years ago, that small possibility felt almost like hope. The fourth morning arrived with frost thick enough to paint the world silver. Caleb woke to find Nayland already awake, sitting at the table with her medicine bag open before her. The 20 seeds lay arranged in a careful pattern, and she was counting them with the focused intensity of someone performing a sacred ritual. He watched from his chair for a moment before speaking. How many times have you counted them? This makes 17 times since last night. She did not look up from the seeds. I count when I cannot sleep. Help me think. And what are you thinking? That my mother died for these seeds, that my husband died to protect them, that maybe Emily Brennan died without them. She finally raised her eyes to meet his. I think about weight, about which life worth more, about how a woman with no power make choice that change everything. Caleb rose, his joints complaining in the cold, and added wood to the fire before joining her at the table. Up close, he could see the seeds more clearly. They were pale, almost luminous in the morning light, each one perfect and identical to its neighbors. Tell me about the plant, he said. Not just what it cures, everything. So she did, and this time listening with the careful attention of a man who understood that details could mean the difference between life and death. Caleb began to see not just the problem, but perhaps the shape of a solution. White sage, Nayland explained, grew wild in only a few places, mostly in valleys where ancient volcanoes had left the soil rich and specific. The plant itself took 5 years from seed to first flowering, but once established, it lived for decades. The healing properties came from the leaves, which could be harvested multiple times a year without killing the plant. So one seed becomes one plant, and one plant produces many, many leaves over its lifetime, Caleb said slowly. Yes, Mother's garden, before soldiers burn it, had 12 plants, some 20 years old. They give enough medicine for whole tribe and anyone else who asks. How many seeds does one plant produce in a season? If healthy, maybe 30, 40 seeds. Caleb did the arithmetic in his head, 20 seeds planted. If even half survived to maturity, that would be 10 plants, each producing 40 seeds annually. After 5 years, there would be enough seeds to plant an entire forest of sage, and enough leaves, potentially, to treat hundreds of patients. But that was 5 years away. Emily Brennan did not have 5 years. She had months at best. In your mother's garden, Caleb asked carefully, before it burned, were all the plants destroyed? Nayland's face went very still. Why, you ask? Because if there are mature plants still living somewhere, we could harvest leaves from them. Cure Emily without needing the seeds. The seeds stay with you, you plant them somewhere safe, and in 5 years there will be enough medicine for everyone. You think I not know this already? You think I stupid? I think you've been running and bleeding and terrified for so long that maybe you haven't had time to think about anything except survival. She stood abruptly, turning away from him, and he saw her shoulders shake once before she controlled herself. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully level. There is place. Valley where mother have secret garden, not where we camp. Hidden place far away. She show me once when I was girl. Make me promise never tell soldiers, never tell anyone who might tell soldiers. Is it still there? The garden? I not know, was 2 years since mother die. Maybe plants still live. Maybe someone find and destroy. Maybe fire burn whole valley. But maybe not. She turned back to face him, and there were tears on her cheeks that she made no effort to hide. If I show you, if we go there and plants still live, I break promise to my mother. I bring white man to secret place. I'm not asking you to break a promise. I'm asking you to save 2 lives instead of choosing between them. He paused, then added quietly, your mother was a healer. Would she want a girl to die if there was a way to prevent it? Nalin wiped her face with the back of her hand. She would say all life sacred. She would say choice between 2 deaths is no choice. Then help me find a way that nobody has to die. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and the morning light grew stronger outside. Finally, Nalin returned to the table and gathered the seeds back into their pouch with gentle hands. Valles Caldera, she said. That where mother's secret garden is. 3 days' ride from here. Maybe 4 with winter coming. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly. The problems were still enormous. But at least there was a path forward, narrow and uncertain as it might be. We'll need horses, supplies, and we'll need to move fast before Marcus runs out of patience. He gave you 3 days, already 1 day gone. Then we leave at first light tomorrow. That gives us today to prepare. He stood and moved to the corner where his traveling gear was stored. Can you ride? With your shoulder? I ride since I could walk, shoulder not stop me. Good, because we'll need to cover ground quickly, and we'll need to pray that Marcus keeps his word about the 3 days. They spent the rest of the morning preparing for the journey. Caleb checked his weapons, cleaned and loaded his Springfield, made sure his revolver was in good working order. He packed food that would travel well, dried meat and cornmeal and beans. He filled water skins and checked his medical supplies, adding what little he had in case they needed it. Nayland worked on repairing her clothing, stitching up tears and reinforcing weak seams. She moved carefully, favoring her injured shoulder, but her hands were quick and skilled. She also took inventory of her own supplies, the few things she had managed to carry with her through weeks of running. Around midday, as they shared a simple meal, Nayland spoke the words Caleb had been both expecting and dreading. I need to tell you something about what I want, what I need if I do this. He set down his food and gave her his full attention. I'm listening. She took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. I want 5 children. Caleb blinked, certain he had misheard. You want what? 5 children, not just this one I carry. 5 total. I want raise them strong, teach them both Apache way and white way, keep culture alive while also learning to survive in white man's world. She leaned forward, intensity burning in her eyes. This not question for you. This my path, my choice, but if we do this thing together, if you help me plant seeds and save white girl and build new life, then you need know what you agreeing to. Nolan, I'm 56 years old. You're asking me to father children? I asking you to be father to children, to help me raise them, teach them, protect them. You have knowledge I need, skills I need, and you have something else. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You have regret. You have guilt. You have hole in your heart where your children used to be. 5 children not replace what you lost, but maybe they give you reason to live instead of just surviving. Caleb felt like he had been struck. The brutal honesty of it, the unflinching way she laid bare truths he had spent years trying to bury, left him speechless. You don't know what you're asking, he finally managed. I know exactly what I ask. I ask old man who think he done with living to choose life again. I ask soldier who refused to kill innocents to protect innocence again. I ask man who build walls around his heart to tear them down. She placed both hands on the table between them. I not ask easy thing. I ask hardest thing, but I think you already choose when you bring me to your cabin. When you clean my wounds. When you stand on porch with rifle and lie to man who used to be your friend. That was different. How? That was survival. This is something else entirely. Yes, this is future. This is hope. This is building something instead of just protecting ashes. Caleb stood and walked to the window, his mind reeling. 5 children. The thought was absurd, impossible. He was too old, too broken, too tired. He had already failed as a father once. He had no right to try again. But even as the objections rose, another voice whispered underneath them. The voice of the man he used to be, before loss and grief had carved him into this shape. That man had loved being a father, had found joy in teaching his son to track deer, in reading stories to his daughter before bed, in the simple daily miracle of watching children grow and learn and become themselves. That man had died with his children, or so Caleb had believed. I need to think, he said. You have until we reach Valle Caldera. Then I need answer. It was fair, more than fair, and yet Caleb felt the weight of it settle on him like snow accumulating on a roof, silent and heavy, and potentially dangerous. They continued their preparations in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. As evening approached, Caleb went out to check on his horse and found himself taking longer than necessary, using the time to wrestle with impossible questions. He was still outside when he heard the sound. A single horse moving fast, coming up the trail from the direction of Fort Stanton. Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved to a position where he could see the trail. A lone rider emerged from the trees, and even at a distance, Caleb could see the youth in his posture. Not Marcus. Someone else. The rider was young, maybe 23 or 24, with the kind of earnest face that suggested he still believed in things like honor and duty. He wore cavalry blues and sat his horse well, but his eyes were nervous as he approached the cabin. Caleb stepped out where he could be seen, but kept the rifle ready. That's far enough. The young man stopped his horse and raised both hands to show they were empty. Sir, I'm not here to cause trouble. Colonel Brennan sent me with a message. I'm listening. He says to tell you that he's thought about your offer, and he wants to make a counter-proposal. The soldier reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. He wrote it down, sir. Said you should read it before you decide. Caleb approached cautiously, took the paper, and stepped back before opening it. The handwriting was Marcus's, tight and controlled. Caleb, I've been thinking about Camp Grant, about the choices we made and the ones we didn't. You were right to walk away. I was wrong to stay. But right and wrong don't matter much to a father watching his daughter die. I'm asking you one more time for help, not as a soldier, as a father. If you can find a way to get me medicine for Emily, I'll call off the search for the Apache woman. She can go free. Hell, I'll give her safe passage myself. All I want is a chance to save my child. That's not too much to ask, is it? You have 2 more days. Make them count. Marcus. Caleb read it twice, then looked up at the young soldier. What's your name, son? Corporal James Hayes, sir. You know what's in this letter, Hayes? No, sir. Colonel Brennan sealed it before I left. But you know about the Apache woman he's looking for? Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. I know we're supposed to be tracking someone who has something the colonel needs for his daughter. And what do you think about that? Hunting a woman to get medicine? The soldier's discomfort increased. Sir, I don't think it's my place to have opinions about orders. That's what every soldier says, right up until they find themselves doing something they can't live with. Caleb folded the letter and tucked it into his jacket. Tell Colonel Brennan I received his message. Tell him I'm working on a solution. And tell him if he sends anyone else up here before the 3 days are up, I'll consider it a breach of our agreement. Yes, sir, I'll tell him. Hayes turned his horse to leave, then hesitated. Sir, for what it's worth, Miss Emily is a good person. She doesn't deserve what's happening to her. Nobody deserves to die young, son. Not white girls and not Apache women. That's the problem with this whole situation. There's no villain here. Just people trying to survive. Hayes nodded and rode away. Caleb watched him go, then returned to the cabin where Nayland was waiting by the window. What he want, she asked. Caleb handed her the letter. She read slowly, her lips moving slightly as she worked through the English, then set it down. He offered deal. My freedom for medicine. Seems that way. You think he'd keep word? Marcus was always a man of his word, even when his word meant doing terrible things. Caleb sat heavily in his chair. The question is whether we can trust him now. And if we cannot, then we're walking into a trap tomorrow morning. But if we don't try, Emily dies, and you spend the rest of your life running. So really, we don't have much choice. Nalin moved to sit across from him, and in the firelight he saw determination etched into every line of her face. We go to Valle Caldera. We find plants. We get medicine. We save girl. Then I plant seeds somewhere safe. And then? Then I have baby, and we see if old mountain man want to help raise 5 more children, or if he rather go back to living alone with his regrets. There it was again, that unflinching directness that cut through every defense he tried to raise. Caleb found himself almost smiling despite the gravity of their situation. You don't pull punches, do you? Life too short for dancing around truth, especially for man your age. This time he did smile, brief and genuine. Fair enough. They spent the evening in preparation, checking and rechecking supplies, discussing the route they would take, and what dangers might await. As night fell, Caleb made up a bedroll by the fire for himself and insisted Nayland take the bed. You're still healing, he said when she started to object. And you're pregnant. You need the rest more than I do. She accepted with a nod, and they settled in for the night. But as the fire burned low and the cabin filled with shadows, Caleb found sleep elusive. His mind kept circling back to her words. 5 children. A future built on purpose instead of just habit. The terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, his life was not over yet. He must have dozed eventually, because when he woke it was to the sound of Nalin moving around the cabin in the pre-dawn darkness. She had already packed her few belongings and was working on braiding her hair by feel more than sight. Couldn't sleep either? Caleb asked quietly. Baby kick all night, and I think too much. He rose and began preparing for the journey, moving through the familiar routines that grounded him. Coffee first, made strong and bitter in the old pot that had been Sarah's. Then checking weapons one more time. Then loading the saddlebags with careful attention to weight distribution and accessibility. By the time the sun broke over the mountains, they were ready. Caleb led his old mare out of the shelter and helped Nayland mount, watching to make sure her injured shoulder could handle the strain. She settled into the saddle with the ease of someone born to horses, and he allowed himself a moment of relief. At least she had not exaggerated her ability to ride. He mounted his own horse, a sturdy gelding named Chester, who had been his companion for the last 8 years, and they set out. The morning was cold enough to make their breath thaw, but the sky was clear and the trail was good. If the weather held, they could make Valles Caldera in 3 days. The first day passed in near silence, broken only by necessary communication. They rode steadily but not punishingly, conscious of both Nayland's injury and the need to conserve the horse's strength. The country they passed through was harsh but beautiful, all soaring pines and granite outcroppings and views that stretched for miles. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Caleb watched Nayland move around their small camp, noting the careful way she used her left arm more than her right, the occasional wince when she moved wrong. But she never complained, and her attention was constantly alert, scanning their surroundings for threats. You said your mother showed you this place when you were a girl, Caleb said as they ate. How did she find it? Her grandmother show her, and grandmother before that show her. Nalin chewed thoughtfully. In Apache tradition, medicine women pass down knowledge mother to daughter, not just how to heal, but where to find plants, where they grow best, which places are sacred. So this garden has been tended for generations. Yes, maybe 100 years, maybe more. My mother say her grandmother's grandmother plant first seeds there. The scope of it struck Caleb. 100 years of women carefully preserving and propagating this knowledge, passing it down through war and displacement and loss. And now that chain of continuity hung by the thread of 20 seeds in a leather pouch. When we plant these seeds, he said carefully, where will you plant them? Valles Caldera, where the garden already is? No, too dangerous. If mother's garden found once can be found again. She looked toward the western horizon. I have different place in mind, even more remote, Even more hidden, place where white men never go because they think is cursed. And is it cursed? She smiled slightly. Only if you believe in curses. I believe in good soil and clean water. That place have both. They rode on as the afternoon lengthened, and Caleb found his mind returning again and again to the question she had posed. 5 children. What would that even look like? He would be nearly 80 by the time the youngest came of age, if he lived that long. Would he have the strength to teach them everything they needed to know? The patience to guide 5 distinct personalities toward adulthood? And what about Nolan? She would be raising children with a man old enough to be her grandfather. A man from a culture that had decimated her own. What kind of life was that? As if sensing his thoughts, she spoke without turning around. You think too loud. I hear you're worrying even over horse hooves. Just wondering if you've really thought this through. I think about nothing else since mother die, since husband die, since I start running. She glanced back at him. You think I ask this because I have no choice, because I need man to survive. But that not true. I survive fine alone. I ask because I see something in you, something broken that could be fixed, something closed that could open again. And if it can't be fixed, if I'm too far gone, then I raise 5 children alone and you die, lonely old man on mountain. But I not think that happen. I think you already choosing life. You just scared to admit it. Before Caleb could respond, she held up a hand for silence. He reined in immediately, every sense alert. For a long moment he heard nothing but wind and the creak of leather. Then it came, the distant sound of horses, multiple horses, moving at speed. How many? Nayland whispered. 3, maybe 4, coming from the south. They were in open country here, no cover except a thin stand of aspens 50 yards to their left. Not enough time to reach it before they were spotted. Caleb made a quick decision. Keep riding, normal pace. If they're friendlies, we don't want to look like we're running. If they're not, running won't help anyway. They continued forward, and within minutes the riders appeared on a rise behind them. 4 men, moving fast, not cavalry. Caleb felt his stomach drop. Bounty hunters. He recognized the lead rider, Silas Pike, a man with a reputation for violence and a complete absence of morals. Pike had been ejected from 3 different territories for various crimes, but somehow always slipped away before justice caught up with him. Pike saw them and immediately changed direction and intercept, spurring his horse to a gallop. The other 3 followed suit. Nolan, Caleb said quietly, his hand moving to his rifle. When I tell you, you ride for those aspens as fast as you can. Don't look back. Don't stop. Just ride. I not leave you. You're not leaving me. You're surviving. Now get ready. Pike and his men closed the distance quickly, fanning out as they approached. Pike himself was a hard-looking man in his 40s, with a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw and eyes like chips of slate. He pulled up 20 feet away, hand resting on his revolver. Well now, he said, showing teeth in something that was not quite a smile. What do we have here? Mountain Man and his squaw taking a romantic ride? Caleb kept his voice level. We're not looking for trouble, just passing through. That right? See, thing is, we're looking for someone, a Apache woman about her size. He nodded toward Nayland. Word is she's worth $800. Then you've wasted your time. This is my wife. We've been married 2 years. Your wife? Pike laughed. You expect me to believe that? Believe what you want. But you're blocking our path and my patience is limited. One of Pike's men, a heavy-set man with a patchy beard, edged his horse closer. Boss, the colonel said the woman was wounded. This one looks healthy to me. Could have healed up, Pike said. Or could be this old bastard is lying through his teeth. Caleb slowly raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone but making its presence undeniable. I'm going to say this once. Move aside or face the consequences. Pike's smile widened. There's 4 of us and 1 of you. Old man, your arithmetic ain't working in your favor. No, but my experience is, I've fought in 2 wars and more skirmishes than you've had hot meals. I'm an old man because I'm good at surviving. Now ask yourself if $800 is worth dying for. The standoff held for several heartbeats. Caleb could feel the violence coiling in the air between them, ready to spring. Then Pike shrugged. Maybe you're telling the truth. Maybe you're lying. Either way, this ain't over. He looked at Nayland directly. If you're who I think you are, remember this. There's always someone willing to hunt you, and sooner or later, your luck runs out. He spurred his horse and rode past, his men following. But as they passed, one of them, a young kid who couldn't have been more than 20, reached out and slapped the rump of Naline's horse hard. The mare spooked, rearing and then bolting. Nayland, caught off guard and hampered by her injured shoulder, lost her grip and flew from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, crying out in pain. Caleb was off his horse before conscious thought, moving with a speed that surprised even himself. He caught Nolan's panicked horse by the reins and got it under control, then turned to find Pike and his men laughing. Something cold and deadly settled over Caleb. He handed the reins to Nolan, who was struggling to her feet, and walked toward Pike with his rifle lowered but ready. "That was a mistake," he said quietly. Pike stopped laughing. "What did you say, old man?" "I said that was a mistake. You just assaulted my wife. Now you're going to apologize." "Or what?" "Or I'm going to put a bullet through your knee, and then another through your partner's knee, and I'll keep shooting until I run out of knees or bullets, whichever comes first." The kid who had slapped the horse looked nervous now. "Boss, maybe we should just go." Pike stared at Caleb, and Caleb stared back, and in that moment, both men understood that this could only end one way. Pike's hand moved toward his gun. Caleb's rifle came up in one smooth motion and fired. The shot took Pike's horse in the leg, dropping it instantly. Pike barely managed to throw himself clear, landing hard in the dirt. Before anyone could react, Caleb had worked the bolt and aimed at the next man. "Next one goes in flesh, not horse flesh. Your choice, B.S." Pike climbed to his feet, rage contorting his features, but he was also smart enough to know he had been outplayed. "You'll regret this, old man. Add it to the list. Now get out of here before I change my mind about letting you walk away." Pike and his men retreated, Pike riding double with one of the others, leaving his injured horse behind. Caleb watched them until they disappeared over the rise, then hurried back to Nolan. She was sitting on the ground, cradling her right arm. Blood had seeped through her bandage. "I think stitches tore." Caleb examined the wound as gently as he could. 2 stitches had indeed pulled loose, but the damage was not severe. "We need to clean this and re-stitch it. Can you ride?" "I can ride, but maybe we ride faster now. They will come back with more men." She was right. Pike was not the type to forget a humiliation, and now they had made an enemy who knew which direction they were heading. They mounted up and set a harder pace, eating up miles as the sun climbed toward noon. Caleb kept one eye on their back trail, but Pike did not reappear. Not yet. By late afternoon, they reached a small stream, and Caleb decided they could risk stopping long enough to deal with Nolan's wound. He worked quickly, cleaning and restitching with fingers that remembered the motions even after years of disuse. Nolan bore it silently, though he saw her jaw clench when the needle pierced flesh. "I'm sorry," he said as he tied off the last stitch. "Not your fault. Pike and his men are dogs. Dogs bite. Still, if I'd been faster, if I'd—" She cut him off by placing her good hand on his. "You saved my life 3 times now. Once in snow, once from infection, once from Pike. You cannot save me from every danger. I not ask you to." "But 5 children," Caleb said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "If I can't protect you, how am I supposed to protect 5 children? Same way every father protect children, with love and vigilance and teaching them to protect themselves." She paused. "You not succeed every time. No father does. Your son Daniel, your daughter Abigail, they die. That was tragedy. That was terrible, but not your fault. You not give them sickness. You not send men who kill your daughter. I should have been there. Maybe, or maybe you die too, and Abigail still die, and then both of you gone." She squeezed his hand. "You cannot change past, can only choose future. And offering you future where maybe, sometimes you protect children, where maybe sometimes you fail, but where always you there, you present, you trying." Caleb looked at their joined hands, hers small and brown and strong, his large and weathered and scarred. 2 people from different worlds, connected by nothing except circumstance and choice. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he said honestly. I not know either, but I think we find out, together. They rode on as evening approached, and Caleb felt something shifting inside him. Not certainty, not confidence, but maybe the first small willingness to consider that his story was not over yet, that there might be chapters still to write. That night they made camp in a sheltered hollow, and as they sat by their small fire eating dried meat and cornmeal cakes, Nayland spoke again about the children. When I say 5, I mean it. 5 total. This one, she touched her stomach, and 4 more. I want enough children that our community survives, that our knowledge passes on, that 50 years from now, there's still people who know how to find white sage and use it properly. That's a dynasty, not a family. Among my people, no difference. Family is community. Community is survival. And you want to build this with an old man you've known less than a week? I want to build it with men who know what it means to lose everything, who understand that family not thing you take for granted, who fight for what he loved because he know what it takes to not fight. She was right, Caleb realized. She saw him more clearly than he saw himself, saw past the isolation and the grief to the man who still, somehow, believed that some things were worth fighting for. I can't promise you 5 children, he said slowly. I might not live that long, but I can promise that whatever time I have left, I'll spend it trying to be the father and grandfather your children deserve. Nolan's face broke into a smile, genuine and warm. That all I ask, that you try. They shook hands like they were sealing a business deal, which in a way they were, a deal for a future neither of them had expected to have. As the fire died down and they settled in for the night, Caleb found himself thinking about names. 5 children would need 5 names, traditional Apache names probably, though maybe some English mixed in. Daniel and Abigail could live again, in a way, through new children carrying their names forward. The thought should have been painful. Instead, it was almost comforting, like his lost children were giving him permission to try again. He slept better that night than he had in years. The second day of travel brought them deeper into the mountains, following game trails that Nalan seemed to know by instinct. The land grew wilder, less touched by human presence. Ancient pines towered overhead, and more than once Caleb spotted elk moving through the forest like gray ghosts. They talked more as they rode, sharing stories. Nalin told him about her childhood, about learning medicine from her mother, about her brief marriage to a warrior named Nantaji who had been killed protecting her escape. She spoke of him with affection, but not overwhelming grief, which told Caleb that theirs had been a marriage of mutual respect more than passionate love. Caleb, in turn, found himself speaking of Sarah and Daniel and Abigail, not with the usual sharp pain of loss, but with something gentler. Memory that honored rather than tormented. He told Nalan about teaching Daniel to track deer, about Abigail's laugh that could light up a room, about Sarah's terrible cooking that they had all pretended to enjoy. It was, he realized, the first time he had spoken of them in years without feeling like he was being torn apart from the inside. As afternoon waned toward evening, Nalan pointed toward a distant peak. Tomorrow we reach Valles Caldera. See that mountain? Garden is on other side, in valley beneath. Caleb studied the terrain with a practiced eye. That's hard country. If Pike and his men tracked us this far, that's where they'll try to make their move. Bottleneck. Easy to control. You think they follow? I think Silas Pike is not a man who forgives easily, and I think $800 is enough to make him persistent. Then we be careful tomorrow. They made camp early, choosing a spot with good sight lines and defensible positions. As Caleb gathered wood for the fire, he found himself thinking about the next day. If Nolan's mother's garden still existed, if the plants were still alive, they could harvest enough medicine to treat Emily. Marcus would keep his word about letting Nolan go free. The seeds would be planted somewhere safe, and then they would figure out what came next. How to build a life from the pieces they had. How to turn survival into something more. How to raise 5 children in a world that was not kind to people like them. It seemed impossible, but then most worthwhile things did. That night, as they sat by the fire, Nalan suddenly gasped and grabbed Caleb's hand, pressing it to her stomach. Feel. Baby kick. Caleb felt it, a flutter against his palm, gentle but unmistakable. A life announcing itself, demanding to be acknowledged. And in that moment, The abstract idea of children became real in a way nothing else had. Strong kick, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He will be strong boy, like his father, like his new father too. You keep saying he. What if it's a girl? Then she will be strong girl, even better. They sat like that for several minutes, Caleb's hand on Nalen's stomach, feeling the small movements of a child not yet born but already present, already real, already worthy of protection. When they finally pulled apart and settled in for the sleep, Caleb lay awake staring at the stars and thinking about the future. About 5 children growing up in a cabin on a mountain. About teaching them to hunt and track and survive. About Nolan teaching them medicine and language and culture. About creating something that bridged 2 worlds instead of choosing between them. It was ambitious, probably foolish, almost certainly doomed to fail in some spectacular fashion. But it was also, for the first time in 16 years, a reason to wake up that went beyond mere habit. And that, Caleb thought, as sleep finally took him, was worth fighting for. The third morning dawned cold and bright. They broke camp quickly and set out for the final leg of the journey. The terrain grew steadily more challenging, the trail narrowing as they climbed toward the ridge that overlooked Valle's caldera. By noon they had reached the top. Caleb reined in and looked down at the valley below. It was breathtaking, a vast bowl carved out by ancient volcanic forces, now filled with meadow and forest. And somewhere down there, if luck and the gods were kind, was a garden of white sage that could save Emily Brennan's life and give Nayland the chance to preserve her mother's legacy. We're close now, Nayland said quietly. Garden is at north end of valley, near the hot springs. Then let's finish this. They descended carefully and had made it perhaps halfway down when Caleb heard it, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. He froze, hand moving toward his own weapon. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The voice came from behind a stand of boulders to their right. A moment later, Silas Pike emerged, rifle aimed squarely at Caleb's chest. And behind him came the rest of his crew, armed and looking eager for payback. Caleb's mind raced, calculating odds and options. None of them looked good. End of the road, old man, Pike said with a savage grin. Now get off your horse, slow and easy, and the squaw comes with me. Caleb dismounted slowly, hands visible, calculating angles and distances with the cold precision of a man who had survived by never making careless moves. Pike had the advantage of position and numbers, but advantages could shift in the time it took a heart to beat if you knew what you were looking for. Hands where I can see them, Pike ordered, his rifle never wavering. The other 3 men fanned out, covering different angles. Professional or at least experienced. This would not be easy. Silas, Caleb said calmly, you're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was letting you ride away yesterday. Now the squaw comes with me, and you get to choose whether you die quick or slow. $800 isn't worth dying for. Pike laughed. Who said anything about dying? You're an old man with a rifle. I got 4 men in the high ground. The math works just fine for me. Caleb glanced at Nayland. She sat perfectly still on her horse, but he could see her eyes moving, tracking each of Pike's men, looking for the same weaknesses Caleb was searching for. She caught his gaze and gave the smallest nod. Ready. The kid from yesterday, the one who had spooked Nayland's horse, shifted nervously. His rifle barrel dipped just slightly as he adjusted his grip. Young, uncertain. That was the weak point. Last chance, Pike, Caleb said. Ride away now and nobody gets hurt. You got some nerve, old man. I'll give you that. Pike started to move forward, rifle still aimed at Caleb's chest. That was when Nayland moved. In one fluid motion, she threw herself from her horse, rolling as she hit the ground and coming up behind a fallen log. Pike swung his rifle toward her, and in that instant of divided attention, Caleb drew his revolver and fired. The shot took Pike in the shoulder, spinning him around. The heavy rifle discharged into the air as Pike went down. Caleb was already moving, diving behind his own horse as the other 3 men opened fire. Bullets whined past, one close enough that Caleb felt the air displacement. He came up firing, placing his shots with care. The heavy-set man called Dutch took one in the leg and went down screaming. The kid froze, unwilling to shoot now that real blood had been spilled. That left one more, a wiry man named Malone who had the look of someone who had killed before and would do it again without hesitation. He fired twice at Caleb, both shots close, then started circling to get a better angle. Caleb rolled left, came up, fired. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. He was out. Malone grinned and raised his rifle for the killing shot. The arrow took him through the throat. He dropped the rifle and clutched at his neck, eyes wide with shock, then collapsed. Caleb spun to see Nolan standing 20 yards away, a bow in her hands that she must have retrieved from her saddle. Her face was set in hard lines, no mercy in her eyes. "You said you could not shoot bow with bad shoulder," Caleb said. "I lied. Apache women learn to lie to survive." She lowered the bow. "Is done?" Caleb looked around. Pike was down but alive, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Dutch was crying and holding his shattered leg. The kid had dropped his rifle and was backing away, hands raised. Malone was dead, the arrow still protruding from his throat. "It's done," Caleb confirmed. He retrieved his rifle and walked to where Pike lay. "You should have taken my offer." Pike glared up at him through pain-twisted features. "Go to hell, old man." "Probably will, but not today." Caleb turned to the kid. "What's your name, son?" "Webb, Carson Webb." "Well, Carson Webb, you've got a choice. You can ride away from here and forget you ever saw us. Or you can end up like your friends. What's it going to be?" The kid did not hesitate. "I'm going. I never wanted to hunt people anyway. Pike said it would be easy money." "Nothing worth having is ever easy. Now get out of here before I change my mind." Webb ran for his horse and was gone in seconds, riding hard back the way they had come. Caleb watched him go, then turned his attention to the wounded men. Dutch was sobbing, the fight completely gone out of him. "Help me, please. I don't want to die out here." Caleb felt Nolan move up beside him. She studied Dutch with the clinical eye of a healer, then knelt and examined the leg wound. "Bone is shattered. He needs surgeon or he lose leg, maybe lose life." "Can you stabilize him enough to ride?" "Maybe, but why we help him? He tried to kill us." "Because that's what separates us from them," Caleb said quietly. "We don't leave people to die when we can prevent it." Nolan nodded slowly and set to work. She used strips torn from Dutch's own shirt to bind the leg, packing the wound with moss to slow the bleeding. It was brutal field medicine, but it would keep him alive long enough to get help. Pike had passed out from pain and blood loss. Caleb bandaged his shoulder wound with similar efficiency, then dragged both men into the shade of a large pine. "They will live?" Nayland asked as they worked. "If they're smart enough to get to a doctor. If not, that's their choice." They left the two wounded men with water and clear directions to the nearest settlement, then retrieved Malone's body and wrapped it in his own bedroll. It seemed wrong to just leave him for the scavengers, whatever he had done. By the time they finished, the sun was past its zenith. They had lost hours they could not afford to lose. But as Caleb looked at Nayland, saw the steadiness in her hands and the clear certainty in her eyes, he knew they had made the right choice. "Your mother would be proud," he said, "showing mercy even to enemies." "My mother always say, we not judge by how we treat friends. We judge by how we treat people who try to hurt us." Nalin wiped blood from her hands onto the grass. "Now we go find garden. Time is short." They rode on, descending into the valley proper as afternoon shadows lengthened. The land here was different from anywhere Caleb had seen, marked by its volcanic origins, in ways both subtle and dramatic. The soil was darker, richer. Strange rock formations thrust up through meadow grass. And in the distance, he could see steam rising from what must be the hot springs Nayland had mentioned. She led them unerringly to the northern edge of the valley, where a small canyon cut into the hillside. The entrance was narrow, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. They dismounted and led the horses in on foot. The canyon opened into a hidden pocket of land, maybe an acre in size. A spring emerged from the rock face at the back, feeding a small stream that ran through the center. And on either side of that stream, growing in careful rows, were plants unlike anything Caleb had seen before. White sage. Even dormant for the approaching winter, they were beautiful. Silver-green leaves with a distinctive shape, stems thick and woody. Caleb counted quickly, 14 plants in all, some clearly decades old based on their size. Nayland dropped to her knees at the edge of the garden, tears streaming down her face. They live. After their everything, they still live. She moved from plant to plant, touching each one gently, murmuring words in Apache that Caleb could not follow. He gave her the time she needed, understanding that this was a reunion that transcended simple relief. This was her mother's legacy, preserved against all odds. Finally, she stood and wiped her eyes. We can harvest. Each plant can give maybe 30, 40 leaves without damage. That enough for many treatments. How do we prepare it? I show you, but first, we harvest. Carefully, with respect. They worked together as the afternoon light turned golden. Nalan taught him which leaves to take, how to cut without damaging the plant, how to handle them so the delicate oils that contained the medicine were not lost. It was slow, meticulous work, but by the time the sun touched the western ridgeline, they had filled 2 large pouches with carefully selected leaves. This enough to treat 20 people, maybe more, Nayland said with satisfaction. Emily will have what she needs. And the seeds? You still want to plant them? Yes, but not here, too easy to find. I plant in place I tell you about. Place white men think is cursed. When? After we save Emily, after we know Marcus Brennan keep his word. She looked around the hidden garden one more time. This place I tell no one about. This is for emergencies, for future generations who might need it. They made camp in the canyon that night, sheltered from the wind and surrounded by the scent of sage. As they prepared a simple meal, Caleb found himself thinking about the chain of women who had tended this garden. Nullen's mother, her grandmother, stretching back through generations. Each one learning from the wives, each one adding to the accumulated wisdom. And now Nayland wanted to create a new chain. 5 children who would carry forward not just Apache traditions, but a blending of cultures. A bridge between worlds. It was ambitious to the point of madness, but sitting here in this secret place, it felt almost possible. Tell me about the children, Caleb said as they ate. You said 5. What would that look like? Nayland thought for a moment. First baby, the one I carry now, he will be Nantaje's son. I want him to know about his father, to carry his name. You helped me raise him, but he is Nantaje's blood. That's right and proper. Next children, they will be ours, mixed blood. I want them to have names from both peoples. I want them to learn both languages, both ways of living. I want them to see that different does not mean enemy. It won't be easy for them. Mixed blood children are often rejected by both sides. I know, my mother treat many mixed blood people. Some Apache call them traitors. Some whites call them savages. They belong nowhere. She looked at him steadily. That why we must make them belong somewhere. Make them belong with us, with family that not care about blood quantum or skin color. Just care about person inside. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. She was describing a kind of family he had never imagined, but suddenly wanted desperately to build. And you think I'm the right person to help with this? I think you only person I meet who understand what it means to lose home, to not belong anywhere. She paused. You say you live on mountains 16 years alone, but really you not alone. You hiding, too scared to build new home because old home was destroyed. I understand that. I do same thing, just my hiding is running instead of staying still. And the children would be our new home? Children would be beginning. Home is what we build around them. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars emerge overhead. Caleb found himself thinking about the cabin, about how it would need to be expanded significantly to house 7 people, about how his stores of food and the supplies would need to increase, about teaching 5 children to hunt and track and survive in the mountains. The practical considerations were daunting, but beneath them was something else, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long he had forgotten what it felt like. The weight of responsibility was familiar, almost welcome after years of having no one to be responsible for. We should sleep, Nolan said eventually. Tomorrow we ride to Fort Stanton. Tomorrow we see if Marcus Brennan is man of honor or just another liar. And if he's a liar, then we fight, but I think he will keep word. You say he was your friend once. Maybe that friendship not completely dead. Caleb hoped she was right, but he had learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing to rely on. Better to prepare for the worst and be pleasantly surprised than to expect the best and be devastated by reality. They set out at first light, riding hard. The sage leaves were carefully packed in Nalen's medicine bag, protected from damage. They had to reach Fort Stanton before Marcus's patience ran out, and they were already cutting it close. The ride back took them through terrain they now knew, past landmarks they recognized. They saw no sign of Pike or his men, though Caleb remained vigilant. Men like that had a way of surviving against the odds. By late afternoon of the fourth day since leaving Caleb's cabin, they spotted Fort Stanton in the distance. It sat on a rise overlooking the Bonito Valley, a collection of adobe buildings surrounding a parade ground. The American flag snapped in the wind and above the headquarters building. Caleb felt old memories stirring as they approached. He had served in places like this, had drilled on parade grounds like that one, had followed orders he later came to regret in buildings just like those. Coming back felt like stepping into a past life. They were stopped at the gate by two young soldiers who looked at Nalin with undisguised suspicion. "State your business," one said. "We're here to see Colonel Brennan," Caleb replied. "Tell him Caleb Stone is here with the medicine he needs." The soldier's eyes widened slightly. "Wait here." He disappeared into the fort, leaving them with the other guard who kept his rifle ready, but not quite aimed at them. 5 minutes later, Marcus Brennan himself appeared, moving with the swift purpose of a man who had been waiting desperately for news. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving from Caleb to Nalen and back. "You found it, the White Sage." "We found it," Caleb confirmed, "and we brought enough to treat your daughter, but we need to discuss terms first." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I thought we already had terms. Medicine for the woman's freedom." "We did. I just want to make sure you remember them before we hand this over." For a moment, Marcus looked like he might argue. Then his shoulders sagged slightly. "Come inside. We'll talk in my office." They followed him through the fort, drawing stares from soldiers who were not used to seeing the Apache women walking freely through their compound. Marcus led them to a building marked as headquarters and into a small Spartan office. He gestured for them to sit, then closed the door. "Where's Emily?" Caleb asked. "In the infirmary, getting worse every day." Marcus's voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "The doctors say it's a matter of weeks now, maybe days. She stopped eating yesterday." Nalen spoke for the first time since entering the fort. "White Sage take time to work, not instant cure. She need treatment for maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Then improvement come." "Can you show the doctors how to prepare it?" "I can prepare it myself. I am medicine woman. This is what I do." Marcus looked at her properly for the first time, and Caleb saw surprise register on his face. Whatever he had been expecting, it was not this composed, articulate young woman. "You would do that? Help my daughter even though I've been hunting you?" "I help because all life is sacred. Because your daughter, not the one who hurt my people. Because this is what my mother teach me to do." She paused. "But you must promise. After Emily is well, I go free. No more hunting, no more bounty. I disappear, and you never look for me again. Done. You have my word as an officer and a father." "Your word as officer mean nothing to me," Nalen said bluntly. "Officers give many orders that lead to murder of my people. But your word as father, that I believe. Father who loved daughter would not break promise that save her life." Marcus flinched but nodded. "As a father, then, help Emily, and you have your freedom." "And the seeds?" Caleb asked. "She keeps those. They're hers by right. I don't care about the damn seeds anymore. I only ever wanted them to save Emily. If the leaves work, that's enough." They walked to the infirmary together, a strange procession that drew even more stares. Inside, they found Emily Brennan in a small private room. She looked terribly young and fragile, her skin nearly translucent, her breathing labored. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her, stolen by disease. Marcus went to her bedside and took her hand. "Emily, sweetheart, I've brought someone who can help you." Emily's eyes opened, dark and fever bright. "Papa? I'm here, baby girl, and we've got the medicine. You're going to get better." Nalen moved to the other side of the bed, her healer's instincts taking over. She examined Emily with gentle efficiency, checking her pulse, listening to her breathing, feeling the heat of fever. Then she nodded to herself. She is very sick, but not too sick. I can help. She turned to Caleb. I need clean water boiling. I need clean cloth. I need bowl for making tea. And I need privacy to work. Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with leaving his daughter in the care of someone he had been hunting days before. But desperation won out. I'll get you whatever you need. Caleb found himself drafted as Nalin's assistant, fetching and carrying as she prepared the medicine with careful precision. She showed him how to select the best leaves, how to crush them to release the oils, how to steep them at exactly the right temperature. It was complex work, more art than science, refined over generations of practice. When the tea was ready, Nayland lifted Emily gently and helped her drink. The girl grimaced at the bitter taste but got it down. Nalin prepared a second preparation, this one to be used as a poultice on Emily's chest to help her breathe. She need this 3 times a day, Nayland instructed Marcus. Morning, afternoon, night, every day for 3 weeks. Do not miss treatments. Do not change amounts. You understand? I understand. Good. And she need good food, broth, soft things, things that build strength. Also, she need fresh air when she able to sit up. Lungs need to work, need to practice breathing clean air. Marcus nodded, committing every instruction to memory. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Just thank you. Nalin's expression softened slightly. You love your daughter. That is clear. A man who loves his children cannot be all bad, even if he follow bad orders. It was, Caleb thought, as close to forgiveness as Marcus was likely to get from someone whose people he had helped persecute. Marcus seemed to understand that as well, because he simply nodded, accepting the statement for what it was. They stayed at the fort for 3 days, monitoring Emily's condition. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she began to improve. Her fever broke on the 2nd day. On the 3rd day, she managed to sit up and eat solid food. The change was remarkable. During those 3 days, Caleb and Marcus found themselves talking, carefully at first, then with growing honesty. They spoke of Camp Grant, of the choices made and the prices paid. Marcus admitted that he had nightmares about that day, that he saw the faces of the dead when he tried to sleep. Caleb admitted that refusing orders had cost him his identity, had left him adrift for years. I thought I was doing the right thing, Marcus said on the 3rd evening, following orders, maintaining discipline. But all I was really doing was avoiding responsibility for my own decisions. We all tell ourselves stories to justify what we do, Caleb replied. The question is whether we learn from them. Have you learned? I learned that surviving isn't the same as living. That isolation is just another form of cowardice, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people matter to you again, even knowing you might lose them. Marcus looked at him thoughtfully. This woman, Nayland, she matters to you. She does. And the child she carries will be the first of 5 if she gets her way, and I've decided to help her raise them. Marcus's eyebrows rose. Caleb, you are 56 years old. I'm aware of my age, thank you. I mean, 5 children. I don't even know what that is. Madness? Probably, but it's the best kind of madness. The kind that gives you a reason to wake up in the morning. Caleb paused. You should understand that. You moved heaven and earth to save Emily. Would you call that madness? I'd call it love. Exactly. They parted on the 4th morning with something approaching mutual respect, if not quite friendship. Marcus provided them with horses, supplies, and a letter guaranteeing Nayland's safe passage through any territory under his jurisdiction. It would not protect her everywhere, but it was something. As they rode away from Fort Stanton, Caleb found himself thinking about the strange turns life could take. 4 days ago, he and Marcus had been enemies separated by choices made decades before. Now they were 2 old men who had found a measure of peace through their shared love for children. Where to now, he asked Nalin, as the fort disappeared behind them. Out we plant seeds, in the place I tell you about. The cursed place. And where is this cursed place? 2 days west, Valle del Diablo, Devil's Valley. White men think is haunted by evil spirits. They never go there. And why do you think it's not haunted? Because I go there many times with my mother. She teach me, places have power, but power not good or evil. Just power. White men make it evil in their minds because they fear what they do not understand. They rode west, taking their time now that the urgency of Emily's illness was behind them. The country grew wilder as they went, more broken and remote. On the second day, they came to a narrow canyon that seemed to lead nowhere. Nalin entered without hesitation, and Caleb followed. The canyon twisted and turned, the walls pressing close on either side. Just when Caleb was beginning to wonder if they were lost, it opened into a hidden valley, and he understood immediately why white men called it cursed. The valley floor was marked by strange rock formations that looked almost like monuments. Pillars of red stone thrust up at odd angles. Hot springs bubbled up in several places, filling the air with the smell of sulfur. Strange mineral deposits created colors that should not exist in nature, vivid greens and oranges and purples. It was alien and beautiful and unsettling at once. My people call this place Tsahaiji, sacred ground. Nalan dismounted and stood looking at the valley with reverence. Many generations ago, warriors came here for vision quests. They say the spirits speak loudly here, show true paths. And your mother brought you here to plant sage? She say this place protect the medicine, that spirits would guard it from those who would misuse it. They spent the afternoon selecting the perfect location, a spot near one of the cooler springs where the volcanic soil was deep and rich. Nellen performed a ceremony before planting, offering prayers in Apache and sprinkling corn pollen on the ground. Then, one by one, they planted the 18 remaining seeds. 2 she kept back, sealed in a separate pouch. For emergencies, she explained, in case something happens to these. As they worked, Caleb found himself thinking about generations yet unborn, about people who would come to this valley in 50 or 100 years and find not 18 plants but hundreds. A forest of healing growing in a place most people feared to enter. Your mother would be proud, he said as they finished. I hope so. She died trying to protect this knowledge. All I do is try to honor that sacrifice. They were gathering their tools when Caleb heard horses approaching. His hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but Nayland placed her hand on his arm. Wait, she said softly, listening. Those are Apache horses, unshod. 7 riders emerged from the canyon entrance, moving with the fluid grace of men who had lived their entire lives on horseback. They were Apache warriors, faces weathered by sun and wind, carrying bows and lances. And at their head rode an old man. He was perhaps 70 years old, his hair long and silver, pulled back with a leather cord. His face was deeply lined, each crease a map of hardship endured and wisdom earned. He wore traditional Apache clothing, a deerskin shirt decorated with intricate beadwork that spoke of high status. Despite his age, he sat his horse with perfect posture, his back straight, his eyes alert. Those eyes, dark as obsidian and just as sharp, fixed on Caleb with an intensity that made the mountain man instinctively straighten. The old man dismounted, his movements deliberate and controlled despite his years. He walked toward them, stopping 10 feet away. His gaze moved from Caleb to Nalin, and something in his face softened. Shadizi, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Granddaughter. Nalin's eyes went wide. Shachai? She took a step forward, then another, then ran. The old man caught her in his arms, holding her tightly as she wept against his shoulder. They spoke rapidly in Apache, too fast for Caleb to follow with his limited knowledge of the language. But he understood the emotion. Reunion, relief, joy mixed with grief. The old man was crying too, silent tears running down his weathered cheeks. Finally, they pulled apart. The old man held Nalin at arm's length, studying her face, then placed his hand gently on her swollen belly. He spoke a question in Apache. Nantaje's son, Nalin replied in English, for Caleb's benefit. He died protecting me. The old man's face hardened. I know. I found his body 3 months ago, gave him warrior's burial. He paused. The soldiers responsible are dead. He turned then to face Caleb fully. I am Haston, medicine chief of the Warm Springs Band. Nalin is my granddaughter, daughter of my daughter Guyen. Caleb nodded respectfully. Caleb Stone. I found Nalin wounded in the snow, brought her to my cabin. I know what you did. Hastings' eyes never left Caleb's face. My warriors have been watching you for 5 days, since you left the fort. We needed to understand what kind of man you are. And your conclusion? That you are neither Apache nor enemy, that you are something rare. Hastings gestured toward the freshly turned earth where they had planted the seeds. You help plant future of my people. You protect my granddaughter when you could have sold her for gold. You stand against your own kind for what is right. One of the younger warriors spoke in Apache, and Hastings replied with a sharp gesture. The warrior dismounted and began unpacking bundles from his horse. We bring gifts, Hastings said. Food for coming winter, blankets, tools, and this. The warrior brought forward a cradle board, beautifully crafted from wood and leather, decorated with protective symbols painted in red and black. For the child. Nayland accepted it with trembling hands, pressing it to her chest. Ahehi shichei. Haston then did something that surprised Caleb. He reached up and removed a leather cord from around his neck. Hanging from it was a small pendant, a bear carved from dark stone, worn smooth by generations of handling. This belonged to my father, Hastings said, stepping close to Caleb, and to his father before him. It is symbol of protection, of strength that comes not from violence, but from standing firm for what you believe. He placed the cord around Caleb's neck. You have earned right to wear it. You have earned right to stand beside my granddaughter as her husband. Caleb felt the weight of the stone against his chest. I'm honored, but I'm also old, older than I should be to start a family. Age is not measured in years, but in what you have learned from them. Hastings smiled slightly. My granddaughter writes me letter. Takes many weeks to arrive, but it arrive. She tells me you agree to help raise 5 children. That takes young heart, even an old body. She told you about the 5 children? She tells me everything important. Hastings' smile widened. She also tells me you are stubborn, scared, and sometimes foolish, but also brave, kind, and ready to live again. She says you are right man for this impossible task. That night they camped together in Valle del Diablo. The warriors built a large fire and shared their food. Hastings sat beside Caleb, speaking of the difficult road ahead. Mixed blood children face hatred from both peoples, the old man said quietly, staring into the flames. Apache call them corrupted. White men call them savage. They belong everywhere and nowhere. I know, Caleb replied, but they'll have family. They'll have people who love them, regardless of blood. Yes, Hastings nodded slowly. That is all any child truly needs. To be loved, to be wanted, to know they belong somewhere. He paused. When I am gone, and when you are gone, they will have each other, and children of their children will have each other. That is how people survive. Not through purity of blood, but through strength of bonds. The next morning before leaving, Hastings spoke privately with Nalin. Caleb watched from a distance as grandfather and granddaughter stood together, foreheads touching, hands clasped. When they parted, both were crying again. Hastings mounted his horse and rode to where Caleb stood. I will return in spring, to see child, to help build if you need. Until then, protect what I have given you. He gestured to Nalin. She is stronger than she looks, but even strong things break if not cared for. I'll care for her, Caleb promised. I know you will. Hastings raised his hand in farewell, then spoke in Apache, words that Nayland translated later. May your path be blessed, mountain man, who chose life over loneliness. May your children grow strong and wise. May your name be remembered with honor. The 7 riders disappeared into the canyon, leaving Caleb and Nalin alone in the sacred valley. But somehow the solitude felt different now. Less isolating, more peaceful. They had been witnessed, blessed, accepted by the keeper of Nalin's bloodline. And that, Caleb realized, mattered more than any legal document or church ceremony ever could. They camped in the Pickling that night, and as they sat by their fire, Nayland raised the question that had been hanging between them since leaving Fort Stanton. So, you really decide? You helped me raise 5 children? I really decided. Why? You could walk away, return to your cabin, return to your solitude. No one would blame you. Caleb considered his answer carefully. Because I'm tired of being alone. Because you're right that I've been hiding instead of living. And because I think those children deserve to have someone in their lives who knows what it costs to lose everything. Someone who will fought like hell to make sure they never have to feel that loss. And when I am old woman and you are long dead, what then? Then those children will be grown and they'll have children of their own, and the knowledge your mother died to protect will live on through them. That's legacy, Nolan. That's how we beat death, not by living forever, but by leaving behind something that matters. She nodded slowly, then smiled. You talk like old wise man now, not like angry hermit I meet in snow. Maybe I'm learning. About time, considering my age. They returned to the cabin 5 days after leaving it, and Caleb saw it with new eyes. It was too small for what they needed to build, too isolated, too much a monument to grief and loss rather than a foundation for future. We'll need to expand, he said as they dismounted, significantly, maybe double the size. I help. I am good with building. I remember. You organize my tools better than I ever did. They spent the winter months expanding the cabin, working steadily as Nolan's pregnancy advanced. Caleb found that the work agreed with him, gave him purpose and structure. He taught Nayland about construction techniques, while she taught him more Apache language and customs. They fell into an easy partnership, each respecting what the other brought to the relationship. In late February, on a night when snow lay thick on the ground, outside Halong, Nayland went into labor. Caleb had sent word to Fort Stanton weeks before, and true to his word, Marcus Brennan had arranged for a midwife to come and stay with them for the final month. The birth was long and difficult. Caleb spent the night pacing outside the cabin, remembering other births and other children, terrified that history would repeat itself. But when the sun rose, he heard the cry of a newborn, strong and insistent. The midwife emerged and smiled. You have a son. Mother and child are both healthy. Caleb entered the cabin to find Nayland exhausted but beaming, cradling a tiny infant with black hair and brown skin. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. His name is Daniel Nantai, for your son and for his father. So both will be remembered. Caleb held the baby, this small, perfect life that represented so much hope and possibility, and felt something inside him that had been frozen for 16 years finally thaw. He wept, not from grief this time, but from joy, from gratitude, from the overwhelming relief of being given a second chance. Over the next years, 4 more children came. Sarah Guyen, named for Caleb's wife and Nolan's mother. Thomas Victorio, after Caleb's lost son and a great Apache chief. Abigail Lozen, after Caleb's daughter and another medicine woman. And finally, Marcus Haston, named for both Marcus Brennan, who had kept his word, and for Nayland's grandfather, who appeared mysteriously one spring and stayed. The cabin grew to accommodate them, expanding in stages until it was more compound than single dwelling. Other families began to settle nearby, drawn by word of a place where mixed blood families were welcomed, where Apache and white lived side by side, where children learned in 2 languages and carried forward 2 traditions. Marcus Brennan visited once a year, bringing Emily, who had grown into a healthy young woman. She and Sarah became close friends, despite the gulf of culture and history between them. Watching them together, laughing and sharing secrets, Caleb saw the future Nolan had envisioned beginning to take shape. But time is cruel even to happy endings. In November of 18, when Caleb was 72 years old and had lived 16 years longer than he had any right to expect, Nayland fell ill. It started innocuously, a cough, nothing serious, or so it seemed. She treated herself with white sage tea, the same medicine she had used to cure Emily Brennan all those years ago. She rested, she drank fluids, she did everything her extensive knowledge of healing told her to do. But this illness was different, resistant. The cough deepened, settling into her lungs with a wet, rattling sound that made Caleb's chest tighten with remembered fear. On the 3rd day, the fever came. Caleb sat by her bedside in the room they had shared for 16 years, the same room where 5 children had been born. He changed cool cloths on her forehead every hour. He forced water between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow. He held her hand as she drifted in and out of fevered dreams, sometimes speaking in English, sometimes in Apache, sometimes in a mixture of both. Their children took turns sitting with them. Sarah, now a skilled healer in her own right, tried every remedy she knew. Daniel brought fresh water from the coldest spring. Thomas kept the fire burning steadily. Abigail sang the healing songs her mother had taught her. Young Marcus, only 8 years old, sat quietly in the corner, watching with wide, frightened eyes. Nothing worked. On the fourth night, as snow began to fall outside, Nalen's fever broke. Caleb felt her forehead and found it cool for the first time in days. Hope surged through him, bright and painful. "Nalen," he whispered, "you're better." The fever broke. Her eyes opened, clear and lucid, for the first time since the illness had taken hold. But Caleb knew enough about death to recognize what he saw there. This was not recovery. This was the final clarity that sometimes came before the end. The body's last gift, a chance to say goodbye. "Caleb," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing with the practiced ease of 16 years. "Stop lying to yourself. We both know." "No, well," his voice broke. "You're going to be fine." The fever broke. "You just need rest." She smiled, that same gentle, knowing smile she had given him the day they first planted seeds together. "Old mountain man, still trying to protect me from truth." She coughed, a wet sound that made her wince. "I am not afraid. I have lived good life, longer and fuller than I had any right to expect." "Don't talk like that." "Shh, listen." She lifted her other hand, touching his face with trembling fingers, tracing the lines that grief and time had carved there. "I need you to listen, not argue. Listen." He nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "5 children," she continued, her voice gaining strength from somewhere deep inside. "All grown, strong, good people who know both worlds and belong to both. 23 grandchildren. A community that welcomes broken people and makes them whole. That is legacy, Caleb. That is everything my mother wanted. Everything I dreamed of when I was running through snow with bullet and shoulder." Your tears ran freely down his weathered cheeks. "I can't do this without you." "Yes, you can. You did it before, remember? Lived alone on this mountain for 16 years. She coughed again, harder this time. "But now you're not alone anymore. You have children, grandchildren, community. You have purpose beyond just surviving. It's not the same. No is better because you will not hide this time. You will keep living, keep building, keep making room for people who need it." She paused, gathering her breath. Around the bed, their children had gathered silently. Sarah held Thomas's hand. Daniel had his arm around Abigail. Young Marcus had crept closer, tears streaming down his face. "Promise me something," Nolan said. "Anything." "When young woman comes to this place, scared and hurting and carrying child, like I once came to you, you help her. You make room. You build more walls if you have to. You keep this place alive as a place of healing and second chances, I promise. And tell our grandchildren and their grandchildren after them, tell them story. Tell them their grandmother was not perfect, was just woman who believed in planting seeds and tending them carefully. Tell them she loved them even though she never met them. Tell them to keep planting, keep growing, keep making space for broken things to heal." Her breathing was growing shallower now, each breath an effort. Caleb leaned closer, his forehead touching hers, as they had done so many times before. "I love you, Nolan, who became my wife. Thank you for saving me when I thought I was beyond saving. Thank you for giving me reason to live again. I love you, Caleb Stone, who was lonely mountain man and became father of many." Her voice was fading now, barely audible. "Thank you for making room for me, for making room for our children, for making room for everyone who had no room anywhere else." She gestured weakly to their children. They gathered close, and she spoke to each of them in turn, in Apache, words of blessing and guidance. Her voice grew weaker with each word, but she forced them out with the same determination she had shown in everything else she had ever done. To Daniel, lead with wisdom, not anger. To Sarah, heal with compassion, not pity. To Thomas, fight for justice, not revenge. To Abigail, teach with patience, not judgment. To Marcus, love with courage, not fear. Then in English, so Caleb could understand, remember who you are, children of two worlds, Bridge builders, seed planters, you are my legacy. Make it grow. She turned back to Caleb one final time. One more thing, old man. What? I win bet. What bet? Whether you could love again. Whether you could open heart you thought was dead. Her smile was radiant despite her weakness. I win. You lose. And we both get everything we wanted. Those were her last words in English. What came after were Apache prayers, death songs sung in a voice that grew quieter with each phrase. Her children joined her, their voices rising and falling in ancient rhythms that had guided Apache souls to the spirit world for countless generations. She died as the sun rose on December 17, 1894, her hands still in Caleb's, surrounded by the family they had built together from nothing but faith and determination and love that refused to acknowledge impossibility. Her last breath was a whisper, barely audible even in the quiet room. Ahihi, thank you. Caleb sat with her for a long time after, holding her hand as it grew cold, memorizing her face in the morning light, the silver threads in her black hair, the laugh lines around her eyes that remained even in death, the strength in her features that had never left her, not even at the end. When he finally stood, his joints protesting, his heart shattered but somehow still beating, he looked at his 5 children and spoke the words he knew Nolan would have wanted. Your mother planted seeds her whole life, seeds in the ground, seeds in your hearts, seeds in this community. Now we water them. We make them grow strong. We make sure they bear fruit for generations to come. That is how we honor her, not by mourning, but by continuing her work. Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes. What do we do first? Caleb looked out the window at the snow falling gently on the compound they had built, at the houses dotting the hillside, at the garden where white sage grew alongside corn and beans, at the life they had created from nothing. First, he said quietly, we bury her next to the cabin, where she can watch over everything she built, and we plant a white sage sapling at her grave, so that even in death, she continues to heal. It was exactly what Nolan would have wanted. Afterward, he found he could not bear to stay in the cabin they had shared. Too many memories, too present and too painful. So he moved to a smaller structure on the property and spent his remaining years teaching his grandchildren the skills they would need to survive, passing on everything he had learned in 7 decades of hard living. And on quiet evenings, he would sit on his porch and tell them stories about a woman named Nolan who had crashed into his life like a stone through ice and taught him how to live again, about medicine and healing and choices that defined who you were, about building bridges between worlds instead of walls. On this particular evening, with Thomas sitting at his feet asking questions, Caleb finished the story he had been telling all afternoon. So you see, boy, your grandmother wanted 5 children, and she got them. And now those 5 children have 23 children of their own, and this place we built together has become something neither of us could have imagined when we started. Thomas thought about this for a moment. Grandpa, do you think Grandma knew? When she asked you to help raise 5 children, did she know it would turn into all this? Caleb looked out at the compound that had grown around the original cabin, at the houses dotting the hillside, at the children playing in the clearing, some Apache, some white, most a beautiful mixture of both, at the garden where sage grew alongside corn and beans, where traditional medicines complemented modern techniques. I think she had faith, he said finally, faith that if you plant seeds in good soil and tend them carefully, something worth having will grow. She planted those seeds in my heart, in this land, in those children. And look what grew. A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. A young woman, maybe 20 years old, with a baby in her arms and desperation in her eyes. She approached slowly, as if afraid she might be turned away. Caleb recognized the look. He had seen it on Nolan's face the first time he found her bleeding in the snow, the look of someone who had nowhere else to go. Please, the young woman said. Father Martin in Socorro told me. He said there was a place where people like me could find help. I don't have anywhere else to go. Caleb stood with effort, his joints complaining but still functional. He looked at Thomas, then at his other grandchildren, who had gathered at the sound of a stranger's voice. Sarah, he called to his eldest granddaughter. This young woman needs food and shelter. Can you arrange that? Sarah, who had inherited her namesake's kindness along with her grandmother's healing skills, nodded immediately. Of course, grandfather. Come with me, miss. You're safe here. As Caleb watched them go, he felt Nalen's presence beside him as clearly as if she were still alive. He could almost hear her voice. This is what we built, old man. Not just children, not just a community, but a place where no one has to survive alone. Thomas tugged at his sleeve. Grandpa, is there room for her? We're already pretty crowded. Caleb smiled, the same smile he had given Nayland years ago when she first told him her impossible dream. Then we'll build more rooms. That's what we do here. We make space for people who need it. He sat back down and pulled Thomas close, looking out at the mountains he had called home for so many years. The sun was setting, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful country, hard country, but country that had taught him the most important lesson of his life. That isolation was not safety, that walls were not protection, that the only way to truly live was to let people matter, even knowing you might lose them, especially knowing you might lose them. The seeds Nalin had carried with her through blood and terror and loss had grown into more than medicine. They had grown into this place, this community, this living testament to the possibility of building something new from the ruins of the old. 5 children, she had said, and Caleb had given her 5. But those 5 had become 23, and those 23 would become hundreds. And somewhere in that multiplication of lives and love and purpose was the answer to the question he had asked himself in the darkest days of his isolation. What was the point of surviving if you had nothing left to live for? The point was this: to plant seeds, to tend them carefully, to have faith that even when you were gone, what you had built would continue growing, reaching toward the light, offering shelter and healing to those who needed it. As the stars emerged overhead and the mountain wind whispered through the pines, Caleb Stone sat on his porch surrounded by family and felt something he had not felt in more than 2 decades. Complete peace. Not the false peace of isolation, but the true peace of a life well lived and a legacy secured. Nellen had given him that, and in return, he had given her children a world where they could grow without shame, where different was not dangerous, where the color of their skin or the languages they spoke mattered less than the content of their character and the kindness of their hearts. It was, he thought as sleep began to claim him, a fair trade, the best trade he had ever made. And when he finally closed his eyes for the last time, whenever that day came, he would do so knowing that he had kept his promise. He had protected them. He had raised them. He had built them a home. And that home would endure long after he was dust in memory. The seeds had taken root. The garden was growing, and the mountain would remember. The end.